Have you ever wondered why an aggressive tariff strategy, one specifically meant to, secure a superpower's dominance,
Yeah.
might actually end up isolating it from its closest friends?
It is a fascinating paradox, isn't it? The whole idea behind this America First trade strategy seemed simple enough to use the threat of really steep unilateral tariffs to, enforce loyalty and bring investment back home, rebuild industries.
Right.
But when we actually look at the data, particularly from key allies like Canada, Japan, and South Korea, we're seeing something quite different. This pressure seems to be pushing them away, not pulling them closer.
And that's exactly what we're exploring today. We're putting together the evidence that shows how these partners, America's closest partners really, are having to adapt to this era of unpredictability.
Mm.
They're actively diversifying their trade networks. It challenges that core idea that you can just win loyalty through, financial threats and ultimatums.
Mm.
And this quiet backlash, it has some pretty profound implications for you, economically and geopolitically.
Let's start with Canada. I mean, historically, they are arguably America's most interconnected partner. For decades, Canada's whole trade identity has been tied to the U.S. Think about it, nearly 3/4 of all their exports go right across that border.
And that deep connection, which used to be a source of strength, suddenly became this critical vulnerability the moment President Trump really doubled down on economic pressure.
Exactly. We saw duties hiked on metals, on furniture, and then came the really big one, the threat of maybe a 25% tariff on the auto sector.
It's huge for Canada.
Oh, absolutely existential. The auto industry was the flashpoint. Early October, the U.S. Commerce Secretary basically said it out loud. When it comes to cars, it's America first, Canada second.
Wow.
Just imagine the impact in southern Ontario. You've got about 500,000 jobs tied into that deeply integrated supply chain. Analysts were saying a 25% tariff, if it lasted, could slash tens of billions from Canada's auto exports annually.
So a massive threat. But here's where it gets interesting, the twist, right? While Washington's putting up these barriers, making these threats, Beijing steps in with essentially an open hand. China starts talking about easing restrictions on Canadian agriculture, cooperating on energy, minerals, even the EV market, which is booming.
And the key thing here is how straightforward China's offer was, relatively speaking. They basically proposed, look, reopen your market to our affordable EVs priced around, say, $35,000 to $40,000 Canadian.
Okay.
And in return, Beijing eases up on Canadian farm exports, especially canola, which was being hit hard. So it offers Canadian consumers choice, yes, but crucially, it gives Canadian farmers back access to 1.4 billion people, a huge market they were losing.
So in Ottawa, this wasn't really seen as defiance, was it? It was more like necessary adaptation.
Precisely. Canada's official strategy became what they called sectoral resilience. They started shifting away from relying just on the big North American deal towards smaller industry-specific arrangements with other partners around the globe. Officials basically framed it as building a network of equals, trying not to be overly dependent on any single partner. The U.S. tariff threats they sped up a mindset shift that was probably needed anyway.
And if you look at the bigger picture, this strategy that was supposed to bring money and loyalty back to the U.S.,
Yeah.
it seems to be actively driving away America's most critical allies. We're seeing this exact same pattern playing out in Asia. This demand for huge financial commitments just to get relief from tariffs, it's fracturing alliances that have stood for decades.
Let's pivot to Japan. Their big trade agreement with the U.S. is still described as unsettled. Now, Washington did lower the auto tariffs from 25% down to 15%.
Okay, some movement there.
Some, yes, but the really crucial parts, the details covering pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, they're still missing. Tokyo's standing firm.
Yeah.
No final deal without those specific orders included.
And there's this other layer, too, isn't there? This massive investment ask from the U.S. side.
That's right. The U.S. is reportedly asking Japan for a, staggering investment package. We're talking 550 billion yen. And it's specifically earmarked to rebuild American industries, semiconductors, pharma, shipbuilding. Washington frames it as restoring U.S. capacity.
But couldn't Washington argue they're justified?
Yeah.
Demanding investment in return for preferential market access. How is Tokyo pushing back? Is it just the money, or is there something else going on?
For Tokyo, it seems the core issue is that the line between a trade negotiation and, well, financial tribute is getting blurred. They see this massive investment demand as sort of a non-starter because it feels less like a reciprocal deal and more like paying a fee just to stay on good terms.
MC for access.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this kind of hesitation from Japan is pretty historic. It's really the first time in decades they've so openly questioned the fairness of a U.S. trade deal, insisting it has to cover their key high-tech sectors to even be considered worthwhile.
And South Korea seems even more resistant. President Lee Jae-myung flat out said he wouldn't sign what he called an unbalanced trade pact that harms Korea's national interests.
Yes, and the U.S. response was immediate and harsh, an ultimatum. Sign the deal, including a dictated $350 billion investment commitment, or tariffs go right back up from 15% to that punishing 25% level.
That sounds less like negotiation and more like coercion.
That's certainly how it was described internally in Seoul. But what really seemed to cement this trust deficit was that high-profile U.S. immigration raid on a Hyundai plant being built in Georgia.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
It massively disrupted the Korean technical teams working there. And more importantly, it showed this complete lack of coordination within the U.S. government itself. You have trade policy trying to pull in investment,
Right.
while immigration enforcement is effectively pulling the rug out from under those same investors. That kind of regulatory chaos, that unpredictability, it's poison for long-term foreign investment. It just screams risk.
So, if these key allies are seeing all this risk, maybe pausing projects, maybe canceling them, what does that actually mean for the U.S. economy, the one that was supposed to benefit from all this?
Well, it means U.S. industry ends up suffering too. The tariffs were meant to rebuild things, but instead they've inflated costs for domestic manufacturers.
Yeah.
We have data showing U.S. steel and aluminum prices climbed nearly 20% since the start of 2025.
Okay, so costs go up for U.S. companies.
Right. And economists estimate that for every 10% jump in tariff costs, manufacturing output in the Midwest drops by about 2%. So the burden isn't really falling on the allies as intended. It's falling on American manufacturers who depend on those complex cross-border supply chains.
And then, didn't we see another big tariff shock hit late last September?
We did. A massive one. A 100% tariff slapped on imported branded pharmaceuticals, plus heavy duties on things like cabinets, furniture, heavy trucks. It immediately sent jitters through the markets.
Especially pharmaceuticals, given Canada's role there.
Exactly. Canada is a key partner in the drug supply chain. European industry groups called it the worst possible outcome for predictability, just throwing more chaos into the system.
So think about this then. Instead of pulling capital into the U.S., this whole cash for relief approach seems to be actively pushing allies to diversify away from the U.S. and even work together more.
That's absolutely what's happening. Japan and Korea are moving quickly to expand their ties through the CPTPP. That's a big Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement.
Right.
Meanwhile, Canada's building stronger bridges with the EU, with Indonesia, trying to hedge against this U.S. volatility.
And the potential scale of this shift. Analysts are estimating it could redirect hundreds of billions of dollars in planned investment away from the U.S. Money that was earmarked for American factories might now flow elsewhere to more stable, predictable places.
It puts Washington's credibility as a reliable long-term partner under serious strain.
There was that Oval Office meeting between President Trump and Prime Minister Mark Carney that really seemed to crystallize the whole issue, didn't it?
It really did. It starkly highlighted the disconnect.
Yeah, reporters there described Trump trying to defend this strategy, but he seemed, well, kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Jumping from tariffs to crime to border issues, drug boats. And he made that claim, didn't he, about over $17 trillion in new investment pouring in.
He did, a figure that just doesn't line up with the official Bureau of Economic Analysis data. The BEA data showed U.S. foreign direct investment for the prior year was under $500 billion. So a massive discrepancy between the claim and the economic reality.
And how did Carney handle that?
Carney, by all accounts, stayed incredibly disciplined, just focused on the facts. He calmly confirmed Canada is the U.S.'s biggest foreign investor, pointing to $500 billion invested in the U.S. over 5 years.
And then came that moment.
Right. The moment when Trump apparently called Carney a great man, but then when asked why there was still no deal, he reportedly said, "Because I want to be great too."
Wow. So when reporters heard that, the sitting president essentially admitting his motivation might be more about personal status than, say, strategic gain.
Yeah.
What did that signal?
Well, it exposed a pretty clear insecurity, didn't it? It suggested to the world, and especially to allies, that maybe the policy wasn't being driven by clear strategy or hard data, but more by performance and a kind of transactional ego.
Yeah.
It basically confirmed fears in places like Tokyo and Seoul that the terms of engagement weren't based on stable economics, but on satisfying an unpredictable negotiator. And that makes any kind of long-term commitment almost impossible.
So when you pull it all together, the picture seems pretty clear. This tariff war, it was meant to project dominance, force compliance maybe, but it's just accelerated this desire among allies for stability, for choice. You see Ottawa pursuing sectoral resilience, Tokyo and Seoul demanding balance, refusing to just pay tribute. The message seems unmistakable.
It really does. Partnerships, particularly the kind meant to last for decades, they just can't survive if they're built mainly on threats and ultimatums. Trust erodes too quickly.
The strategy that was supposed to make America first hasn't brought in those promised trillions in investment. Instead, it seems to have cost the U.S. billions in, well, credibility and trust.
And simultaneously pushed allies closer to competitors like China, ironically enough.
Which leaves us with a pretty important final question to think about. When a superpower relies so heavily on its economic weight as a weapon, does it ultimately risk losing the very global trust and long-term stability that actually defined its leadership in the first place?